Hey there beautiful humans, I'm RidersDX and welcome to my channel where today we'll talk about a major Crash Team Rumble update that just got basically dropped on us, and that is a full-blown review of Catbat. And so not only did we get a gameplay review, which I'm showing footage of on the screen right now, but we also got an in-depth interview on Catbat's characteristics, the abilities, and way more backstory than I thought we were ever gonna get for a new character in this game, because Crash Team Rumble is a multiplayer game. So I really wasn't expecting like a huge focus on lore, but Toys for Bob surprised me because they're actually tackling lore in a very interesting way that might prove to be very intriguing for really diehard Crash Bandicoot fans. So they have this interview on Kotaku that goes through a lot of detail. I only skimmed through this thing, but I haven't really read through it completely. So let's go ahead and just take a look at the interview. Crash Team Rumble, a multiplayer game set to launch on PlayStation and Xbox consoles on June 20th, sees Toys for Bob put its own heroes into the mix, including Catbat, a lover of rock and roll, an escaped prisoner of antagonist Dr. Neocortex, and a long-running series' first non-binary character. This low-key confirms that there's going to be other brand new characters as well being thrown into the mix, so we'll just have to see who else is going to join the Rumble. Kotaku sat down with Toys for Bob creative director Dan Neo and co-studio head Paul Yan to talk about Catbat's conception, their place in the Crash Bandicoot world, and how they fit into Crash Team Rumble roster. The team describes Catbat as an amalgamation of a few ideas, but in terms of the initial design, the concept of a David Bowie style rocker acted as a base for everything that followed from lore to gameplay. I love it already. Give Catbat their flowers, let's go. On the art side, we had an interest in this concept aesthetically of a David Bowie-like character, Yan tells Kotaku. A rock star that breaks certain expectations, has a confidence and flair that's just magnetic. I would say that character creation at Toys for Bob is a very organic process, he says. It isn't a standardized thing in which it all flows through one process. Sometimes a character is born out of a piece of art that we are inspired by, and just trickles a whole bunch of conversations with designers and modelers and animators and artists, and the whole gamut of game developers, and those conversations lead into prototypes, and then we eventually find a character. Jan says Toys for Bob wanted to capture confidence and flair of Catbat, but the origin is not that glamorous. He likens Catbat's beginnings to that of Crash himself with an angstier twist. The original Crash Bandicoot game opens with Cortex experimenting on a jean-wearing platform jumping hero, and Catbat is another victim of the villain's unethical methods. I think that one thing that was interesting for us to tell was how different that relationship is in terms of how Crash Bandicoot sees Neocortex, Jan says. Catbat almost has a resentment for their origin, and through this buildup of a confrontation, figures out that they are their own person, they're born out of kindness from a stranger. That origin is explored in a digital comic that leads into the events of Crash Team Rumble. Catbat escapes Cortex's lab and is saved by a kind stranger before finding community within rock music. But that doesn't mean they've completely healed from what Cortex put them through, and that trauma acts as a driving force for them in the expanded Crash Bandicoot universe. There'll be a link to the comic in the description box below if you want to check it out, but needless to say, this is just such an amazing idea for these characters. I hope we don't just see this for new characters. I'd love to see these for older characters as well, tell a little bit more story behind them. I mean, what really happened with Dingo's Diner, for instance? Is there any more story to that we would love to hear? What more could we learn about the alternate Tana's past? How did Crash and Coco pass in her universe? I don't know if the comic would go into that much detail, but I mean, there's so many potential ideas as to how to expand the lore. It really made Crash Bandicoot its own full-fledged universe, because I feel like that's something that Crash Bandicoot unfortunately lacks compared to a lot of other platformers. Sonic, for instance. Sonic has so much lore, way too much lore to even go about describing at this point. But that lore has aided Sonic to becoming quite a huge franchise with a huge fan base, and all these different fans have different things to love about Sonic because of how expansive the lore has become. And so if we can see Crash Bandicoot really start to head in that direction, I love to see it, because Crash Bandicoot, the universe is so interesting, so colorful, so vibrant, so different. There's so many interesting creatures in this universe, and being able to actually learn about them through this method would be such a great way to really establish a solid, loyal fan base to Crash Bandicoot. I mean, we already have one because of the gameplay, but if we can really get people behind the franchise due to its lore as well, that would be an amazing smart move for the team. I think one thing that we're most excited about with the comic and future comics that will come out with the heroes is that this is a space that sits outside the game, Jan says. If you are the type of fan who wants to know more about characters' lore or their relationships or their identity or their personality, this is a place for those fans to kind of dig in deeper and ask those questions. And we can have that kind of exploration exploration. Crash Team Rumble is not an adventure, it is a multiplayer game. So now we're going to head into the gameplay portion of Catbat, which I think is going to be just as interesting. Catbat may have similar origins to Crash, but their in-game utility was designed to be much different. While Crash does a lot of running and jumping as a scorer character, Catbat was designed for vertically through flight. This was both to differentiate them from other characters, but also to take advantage of the wider space Crash Team Rumble provides compared to the more linear levels of a typical Crash Bandicoot game. After Crash 4, we were more careful in our metrics to make sure that everything was really tight because it's a very controlled experience, Neo says. There was a great excitement within the team moving into Crash Team Rumble with the more open arenas to allow players a sense of mobility and looseness in the capacity to get high in the air that Catbat provides. The core of Crash Team Rumble is made up of 2 teams of 4 that face off to gather the series' iconic Wampa fruit around the map. Meanwhile, blocker characters defend goals from the opposition and supporting booster characters unlock power-ups. Neo says finding where a flight-based character fits into the game structure presented a challenge because most of the roster is locked to the ground, but adding abilities like a downward slam that increases in strength the higher up they are gives Catbat a reason to do more than just fly out of reach, though that naturally comes with a bit of risk. Coming down from a high point requires some commitment, as you need to both be sure of where you're landing and be sure you're not putting yourself in more danger by joining enemies on the ground. Initially there was a lot of hesitancy, Neo says. Could we really make a character be as mobile as Catbat is? But what we found when we started developing the gameplay was that there was many reasons to return to the ground when you play as Catbat, so actually it worked. So we were able to integrate a character into what is, on the whole, a fairly ground-based roster with a great deal of verticality and mobility, and that played back and forth with the art team as the look and feel of Catbat was developed in parallel to gameplay in that like a jam session. Between the rocker aesthetic and the verticality-based mechanics, Jan says Catbat is a prime example of different departments collaborating to marry a visual concept and a design one. The process of the team as compared to yes-anding each other's ideas until the concept becomes a full-fledged character. Sometimes characters are developed from a hero designer coming up with the mechanics that we want to explore, and then they inform art, and art kind of goes back and forth, Jan says. So it's really like improv. And that back and forth between people with different disciplines and different background results in unique combinations and unique decisions that come about as characters. Now we're heading into a section talking about Catbat being a non-binary character, and I'm really intrigued to hear what they have to say about this. As for how Catbat's non-binary identity came to be, original character designer Nicholas Cole has publicly stated that he envisioned them as non-binary when he was first in the design stage. While Cole said he was unsure if the character's queerness would stick after he left the company in 2021, Jan and Neo tell Kotaku that changing the character's gender wasn't on the table, and keeping Catbat as a non-binary hero felt in line with the Bowie-inspired design the team wanted. The concept from the art side of things was this attraction to a David Bowie-like character, Jan says. Aesthetically, Bowie had this kind of rockstar androgynous look that we really loved as we started to flesh out that character in his design, and we finally got to a point where we had a model sheet. As a team, we started referring to Catbat as they, and it was a very natural thing. It wasn't a hey guys, we need to get together and have a meeting about this. It was a very organic way of describing that character, and that just sat with us throughout. From my perspective, Rockstar was kind of the big star that we were aiming at with this character, and that defined everything that fell out of it, Jan says. I don't think that was at the forefront of how do we solve this, how do we genderize the character. It was more natural for us as we talked about the character to talk about their personality and the swagger more than these other aspects. Toys for Bob doesn't believe Crash Team Rumble is a for kids game, instead views it as an edgier take on the series more geared towards millennial and Gen Z fans. Even so, the mascot platformer often appeals to kids by the nature of its character design. Regarding any possible pushback, Jan and Neo pointed out that much of the exploration of the characters would come from the team's digital comics rather than in the game itself, and that anyone interested in those things could seek it out without coming across it in the game. The universe is rich, and there's different types of media that can express different things in different ways for different characters, and comics is one thing that we're excited to add to this mix for Crash Team Rumble, Jan says. As such, while Catbat will be referred to with they/them pronouns in Crash Team Rumble, when Crash Team Rumble launches on June 20th, don't expect the game to spend much time talking about their non-binary identity. In the meantime, Jan and Neo see no reason to be cagey about who Catbat is. We just didn't see it as a big deal, to be honest with you, Neo says. It's a super cool character. This felt like the right fit. Like Paul said, that this is backstory. The comic seems like a great fit for it. There's no reason to not acknowledge the way we saw the character. I think Crash Team Rumble at its core is a multiplayer game focused on expanding cast of heroes, and we want to make sure that as the cast grows, it covers new ground, Jan says. Whether that's mechanically in the design space, aesthetically, its silhouettes, its color space, and I think gender representation is just another vector here that we want to explore in that cast as it grows. So that was a huge read, but there was so much information there and so much good like nuggets about Catbat, and not just like who Catbat is, but how the gameplay is like, and just like the whole revelation that there's just gonna be more lore than we thought coming out of this game, which I'm really excited about that in particular, because like I said, I think Crash Bandicoot has the potential to be such a story-driven series. It just really wasn't ever considered like a story-driven series. I feel like Crash 4 is like the closest we got to it, just because, you know, we had like in-depth cutscenes more so than any other game of that game, and it looks like Crash Team Rumble, the least likely game that I thought was gonna focus on story, is gonna have a focus on story, just not in the traditional sense of it actually being in the game, but being outside media that fans can consume, which I think is fine too, because while it would be nice to have this stuff be in an actual game, Crash Team Rumble is not really the kind of game that really should have that kind of stuff. So if they're gonna give it to us, I think this is the best and smartest way of giving it to us. Plus, it allows them to constantly update the lore as well. It doesn't have to be like, okay, this is all in the game, and you don't need to go through the trouble of like adding more cutscenes and adding more story missions to expand the story of Crash Team Rumble. You can just put out a comic like that, you know, or put out an interview like this. You can just kind of add to it as you can. Now, as for like Catbat's like identity and things like that, I will say that like I do respect Toys for Bob for going out there and like adding some more diversity into the cast. I think like representation is a really important thing in any kind of media, and video games are no exception. And what a fun way to represent non-binary people with a character that looks so cool and looks like a whole lot of fun to play. So I gotta say, well done to Toys for Bob. Thank you so much for doing representation in such a great way so far, and I can't wait to see what else they come up with. But with Catbat being reviewed, what other characters would you all love to see in Crash Team Rumble? If you head over to this video in the top left corner, I'll talk about 10 characters from different franchises that I would love to see in Crash Team Rumble. A quick shout out to Mario Bro Ultimate, who commented on my last video that by the logic that I explained in that video, we should have an Odyssey sequel by now, and you are preaching to the choir. Odyssey 2 should have happened by now. It should have at least been announced by now. The fact that we got Tears of the Kingdom and not Odyssey 2 really pisses me off, because low-key hot take, but Breath of the Wild didn't really do that much for me. So anyway, y'all, thanks so much. This is Riders, riding out.